Hey folks, hope you're doing well today. So I'm recording this on the bank holiday Monday, and it just seems like we've had more rain here in the northwest. I don't know what it's like where you live, but more rain than I've ever known. For days on end it's been raining, and it's just giving me this slightly apocalyptic feeling. And yeah, it doesn't help that things on the news are pretty horrendous this week. My baby hasn't been sleeping, my toddler rather, hasn't been sleeping. We tried to do a kind of a night weaning thing, which just backfired and meant that I didn't have an evening, and he was awake till 9:30 every night, whereas normally he goes to bed at about 7. So yeah, I'm recording this, feeling a bit tired, feeling a bit jaded, and just wanted to say that because I know that there are going to be other people watching this who are also feeling it at the moment. Basically, everyone that I speak to seems to be struggling with something, whether it's something in your own life, whether it's things in the world, sense of like almost despair. I just wanted to say that in case anyone's feeling alone with that, you're absolutely not alone. Now, putting all of that aside, because in this week's episode, I really wanted to talk about the topic of caring what people think and how to stop caring what people think. Although I do say that with a few caveats, because I actually don't believe that it is possible for most people to completely not care what people think. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But care less what people think, or worry less, or not allow it to hold you back so much. Now, maybe you experience some of the following things. Maybe you keep quiet about your idea in a meeting because you're afraid that people won't think that it's good enough. Or maybe you're somebody who would love to be sharing things on social media, or you'd love to be sharing your writing, your art, but your finger hovers over the publish button and you decide not to share something because you're afraid of what, I don't know, it might be your friends from school think or your colleagues think of what you're sharing. It could be that you are in a group of people and you feel anxious and tense, and it means that you don't show up as the real you. Now, while it's totally normal to worry to some extent what people think, if it is really holding you back in your life, if it's stopping you from being yourself, if it's keeping you quiet about your ideas, if it's stopping you from following your dreams or speaking up about what you believe in or doing what you care about, then it's really something to look at and to start to work on. And so I'm going to share in this podcast a few ideas on things that may help. And I also wanted to share a few other ways that this shows up for me, just to normalize it a bit. I know it's so normal anyway, but sometimes we need to hear other people's experiences. So one thing I'm really noticing myself at the moment in terms of this is to do with showing up on social media. Now, the algorithm and the whole online world has changed so much. I've been on Instagram since the beginning. When did it start? I've no idea. 2016, so 8 years or something. And it has changed so much since then. And it's the algorithm that's changed, trends come and go, just the whole way that Instagram works. I've noticed that it's really hard not to hang my self-worth on whether or not something that I post is doing well or not. It's really hard to continue to have the confidence to put yourself out there, to share your ideas, to be honest, to be open, to be creative, when you get a very fast and real feedback as to what other people think or whether it's resonating with people. And I'll be honest, I have struggled with that a little bit. And I've really had to, over the last kind of several months, reflect on this and come back to some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you in a moment, because I think that's something for all of us to be alert to. Are we hanging our self-esteem on what other people think? Now, if we're hanging our self-esteem on what other people think, that is always shaky ground, because we can't really control what other people think. We've seen so much over the last few years with cancel culture, how at 1 minute somebody could be built up and put on a pedestal, and the next minute they could be torn apart. So if we are hanging our self-esteem on what other people think, it's really not going to do us any favors, and it's going to inhibit our creativity, it's going to inhibit our truth, and mean that we're not able to do our best and be our best in the world. So just this reminder as well that it is very normal to care what people think. We are literally wired to want to get acceptance and approval from other people. And it really is linked to our survival. You've probably heard me say this before, this idea that if you were kicked out of the tribe, if you were ostracized from your community when we were evolving, that could have been a life or death. And so there is something very much built into our neurology that is making us want to be part of the community, have approval from other people, and to be liked and accepted. And even now in modern times, a little bit of that is not a bad thing. If you really were someone that gave 0 Fs what people thought, it might actually make you not a great person. You could end up hurting people. You could end up treading over people's feelings in the pursuit of what is important to you. It could be a sign that you lack empathy. So the fact that you care what people think is actually a good thing. Maybe it helps you to be more sensitive to others, be respectful, get along with people. So it is a good thing in some ways, but we don't want it to go too far. We don't want to take it so far that it's causing us anxiety, that we're worrying, that we're second guessing ourselves and not taking action, not showing up as ourselves as a result of that. And let's also remind ourselves of this truth that people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think. They are basically far too busy thinking about themselves, worrying about themselves. And there's something that psychologists call the spotlight effect. And it's basically this thing where we believe that we're being noticed much more than we actually are. It's this sense that everyone is paying close attention to your actions, to your appearance, to the things that you're saying, and you feel as though you're under a spotlight, when the reality is that most people are not judging you nearly as much as you think they are. And there was another study I found, this one was from quite a while ago, 2001, which seems like another lifetime ago, but it's a study that basically said that we tend to overestimate how harshly we're judged by others. We assume that people spend a lot more time passing judgment than they actually do. So chances are you are overestimating, firstly, how much people are noticing you and how much they're judging you and how negative their judgments are about you. So perhaps that sets the scene a little bit. Try to remember that people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think. And so I'm going to share 3 things that you can do to stop caring what people think. Now, the first one is to know your values. This is about asking yourself, what matters to you in your life? And when we get really clear on what matters, what we value, and what is really important to us, it helps us to connect with the deeper meaning behind what we're doing and the deeper sense of ourselves and our truth and what's important. And when you know your values and when you know what is important to you, what other people think becomes less important. And it gives you this clarity to make decisions based on what you think is right and what is important to you rather than what might please others or what others might think. And so the more that you're connected to your values, the more that you're able to focus on being true to yourself rather than caring about what other people think. So I'm going to share some ideas on things that you could journal on. So you may want to write these down or put a little note in your phone and come back to these ideas to really help you to connect to your values and what's really important. So the first one is to think about what makes you happy. So it might be considering the times in your life when you felt really happy. Were there certain activities that you were doing? Were there certain people that you were with, places that you went? Make a list of these things and think about what it was that was important to you about that. So say there's a time that you spent with a friend and that was an amazingly happy memory. Think about what was important to you about that. Was it the fact that they really saw you for who you are? Was it the fact that they brought a lot of fun and playfulness? So thinking about these sort of questions can get you connected to what's important to you and what your values are. Another thing to think about is to look at the people you admire. It could be your heroes or people that you admire. It could be a public figure, someone that you know. It could be a friend. What is it about them that you really admire? What is it about what they do or how they do it? Is there something about their life, their attitude that you really value? Because often when we think about the people that we admire, it's showing us, it's signposting us towards what we value and what is important to us. So when I think about the people that I admire, I often think about people that have got a lot of integrity, a lot of openness and honesty, people that seem very free in themselves. And that's really showing me those values that are important to me as well. You might want to think about your peak experiences or your proudest moments. Think about a time when you felt really great about yourself or really proud of yourself. What was it that you were doing? How were you showing up? What was important to you about that experience? And that can show you what it is that you really value as well. And then another couple of questions that you can consider to really think about what's important to you are, what is something that is a non-negotiable for you? So what is something that you need in your life no matter what? Another question you can ask is, if money was no object, if I had all of the money in the world and all of the time in the world, what would I do? How would I spend my time? What would be really important to me? And asking yourself that question can just really get you thinking about, in a very expansive way, what matters to you. So again, when you focus on what is important to you, what matters to you, what your values are, we can start to let go of what other people think, because we're so connected to what's important to us that it just seems to matter less what other people might be thinking. It's also about connecting to a sense of motivation. So we're connected to our why. If anyone's ever seen this famous TED talk by Simon Sinek, he said, really connect to the why behind why you're doing something. So if that is, I don't know, setting up a business, or it's sharing on social media, or it's talking up about what's important to you, or it's setting boundaries, if you're connected to why you're doing that, you have this intrinsic motivation and drive and energy to really be able to stick to doing that, even if it's hard and even if it feels uncomfortable, because you've got that connection. So that was idea number one, slightly long-winded one, but this is idea number two. So this is about setting boundaries with other people. Now, so often in our relationships, we get comments about things that may not be wanted or solicited. We may get advice. We may have people asking questions in a way that isn't actually very helpful. And so one suggestion I have for caring less what people think and worrying less what people think is actually to set boundaries on some of those conversations. For example, me and a friend were talking one day, and we just decided that from that day onwards, we were not going to talk about each other's weight. We were not going to comment on whether one of us had lost weight. We weren't going to talk about anything to do with our diets or anything like that. We were just going to take that whole conversation off the table. And this sort of boundary, it wasn't really a boundary, it was more an agreement that we came to together. But this came out of, not necessarily that this was something super triggering for us, but that actually it had the potential to be triggering, and it had the potential to be a bit unhelpful. And we realised, especially as women, that there are so many other important things to talk about and much more interesting things to talk about. So we just said, you know what, we're taking that off the table. So it might be that in your life, you have a conversation with someone where you say, I really don't want to talk about my weight. I don't want to talk about dieting. I don't want to talk about fitness. You may even explain that those topics are triggering for you, or they cause you to worry or feel insecure, and you may want to have those conversations. It may be similar. I'm thinking about things like dating. So you may say to your parents, please don't ask me about dating. If I have some news, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be the first to know, or please don't ask me when I'm going to have a baby. Or perhaps you're just starting a business and it's such a tender time and vulnerable time. You're starting something new and you are going to let your family members know, please don't quiz me on this and that. Please don't ask me lots of questions. Being the one that is going to offer things to share in your own time, but actually saying to people, I don't want to have questions or comments or unsolicited advice about this topic. And I know boundaries are scary and it can be really uncomfortable to set them, but having these sorts of conversations with people actually can improve our relationships so much, because we are creating parameters and you're going to be actually doing your relationship a favor by having those boundaries. Otherwise, you're going to be feeling irritated by being asked again about your dating life or about the diet that you're on or whatever that might be. So this is number 3, and I think this is my favorite one of the 3, and it is to ask ourselves, what am I assuming? What am I assuming? And this is one of my favorite coaching questions, to ask someone, what are you assuming in this situation? Because very often we are making assumptions. We are drawing conclusions from very little facts or from a mind read where we are assuming that someone is feeling something or thinking something. So very often we're making assumptions with very little facts and with quite a lot of mind reading. So mind reading is any situation where we are jumping to conclusions or assuming what another person might be thinking. And very often we do mind reading based on very little actual data. So it could be a slight expression on someone's face. It could be an ambiguous text message or someone not replying to something. We can draw all sorts of conclusions, thinking the worst, going to the worst case scenarios, when actually we don't know what's going on for the other person. And we are, in fact, just making an assumption. So I often say this to clients and people that I work with. You have many talents, but mind reading is not one of them. So one thing that I'm doing right now, I'm really focusing on, is really consciously stepping back and asking myself, what am I assuming here? Am I making assumptions? And deciding to not draw conclusions or make assumptions based on very little data. An example might be someone didn't reply to a what straight away or at all. And my inclination may be to draw conclusions from that. They don't like me, I said something wrong, I just suggested that we meet up and they didn't get back to me. And instead of doing that, I am letting go of those assumptions and just taking things more and more at face value. So it's about asking yourself, what are the facts here? Instead of worrying about what people might be thinking, what are the actual facts? And making a decision based on that. And taking that a step further, we can start to say to ourselves, what is the most generous assumption that I can make about this situation? So say, I don't know, someone is staring at you as you're walking down the street. We can go into all sorts of mind reads or negative assumptions about what they might be thinking. But the most generous assumption, they like what they see. They're admiring my outfit. Or maybe something even like, they think I look like someone that they know. There could be so many generous assumptions that we could choose to make that would be so much more helpful for us to think, rather than the worst and most negative thing that we could assume. So it might be assuming that a person hasn't replied to your message because they are just genuinely too busy, or they just genuinely forgot, rather than assuming that they don't like you. Or instead of assuming that your school friends are judging you of your new business venture, choosing to assume instead that they are inspired by the steps that you're taking. So there you have it. Those are my 3 things. We talked about knowing your values and what's important to you, your why. We talked about setting boundaries with other people about what is and it isn't okay to talk to you about and have conversations about. And we touched on assumptions and choosing to choose the most generous assumption that we can about what someone else might be thinking. So I'd love to know from you, what tips do you have on caring less what people think? Or is this something that you struggle with, and how does this show up for you? I'd love to hear from you. You can come and find me over on Instagram. I'm at Chloe Brotheridge. And if you come on over to my website, karma-u.com, I'll put the link somewhere. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the link there, or in the show notes of the podcast, you'll see the link /confidence. I will send you a free confidence affirmations MP3, which is basically a way of changing your self-talk by speaking to yourself in a more positive and encouraging way. And with repetition, we create a new habit and new neural pathways to help us to speak to ourselves in this more positive and encouraging way. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you're doing okay. Hope that you have a great week ahead, and I will see you soon.